Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. Last year, the New York Times ran an article entitled, "Schools Use Web Tools and Data is Seen at Risk." If it had said credit card data at risk, the world would have noticed, but what harm can there be in gathering some information about children? The article said public schools around the country are adopting web-based services that collect and analyze personal details about students without adequately safeguarding the information from potential misuse by service providers, according to new research. Some of that research comes from Fordham University. A study there found that 95% of districts rely on cloud services, like iCloud, for a diverse range of functions, including data mining related to student performance, support for classroom activities, student guidance, data hosting, as well as special services such as cafeteria payments and transportation planning. The Times points out that some contracts between local school districts and the companies providing these services actually allow the companies to sell that data on children that they've gathered. According to the Electronic Privacy Information Center, the federal government student privacy law, known as FERPA, has been watered down by the Department of Education. Following the department's changes to a federal student privacy law, private companies and government agencies have access to student records without obtaining student consent. It's shameful that student data can be sold, but that's only part of the problem. Despite studies that show computer-based curricula to be less effective than traditional classroom instruction, school districts in the last few years have been in a mad rush to get laptop computers, iPads, and other electronic devices into the hands of all the kids, often with funding from Uncle Sam. When students work or play on these devices at school, home, or anywhere else, they create a digital record. More and more, that record is becoming permanent. Storing data is cheap, and the schools never know when it might be extremely helpful. For instance, in the case of a lawsuit, schools have always had a permanent record that follows a student at least through high school, but it used to include only major test scores, report cards, courses taken, and other basic data. In the new paradigm, every keystroke, every click of the mouse, every word written, test question answered, and every website visited will stay on the child's record forever. According to the Common Core website, 44 states, the District of Columbia, 4 territories, and the Department of Defense Education Activity have adopted the Common Core state standards. That covers a wide swath of American education. One of the hallmarks of Common Core is that it puts an emphasis not on whether the student answers a test question correctly, but on the thought process that went into how the student came up with the answer. It's inevitable that computers will be programmed to analyze how each child thinks, and those thought processes will also become part of the massive new permanent record. I've told you before about the NSA's ability to store almost unfathomable amounts of data. Last year, Ira Hunt, the CIA's chief technology officer, said, "We fundamentally try to collect everything and hang on to it forever." This vast new data mine will allow the government to chart each child's maturing process with computer algorithms that can identify terrorist tendencies, among a host of other things. Psychologists will devise testing that will enable computer programs to determine each child's tendency toward antisocial behavior. Because tests are more and more standardized, these computer programs will be able to compare children across the nation. If that sounds unlikely to you, consider this. How many school shootings will it take before parents throw up their hands and say, I don't care about the kids' privacy, just protect them? The world's government files are overflowing with data about their citizens, and that's about to increase many-fold. Big Brother will not be a human being watching over our children every keystroke, but a network of government computers programmed to spot trouble before it happens. And to the upper echelon of the world's Christian-hating elite, suicide bombers aren't nearly as big a problem as people who think for themselves. Young people who believe God's word are already seen as the real subversive element in our society. Now, the government will have its eyes and ears on them at all times. Just think how valuable this kind of information will be in the hands of the Antichrist. He will be able to eliminate all threats to his control based on their tendencies as recorded in the vast government computer files. I'll be back after this message. A few days ago, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, speaking at a closed-door session of the Trilateral Commission, gave this warning regarding Israel and the need for a two-state solution. The statement was secretly recorded by a journalist and released without the Secretary's permission. He said, a unitary state winds up either being an apartheid state with second-class citizens, or it ends up being a state that destroys the capacity of Israel to be a Jewish state. The Trilateral Commission is at best an elitist, highly secretive organization. Its impact on the world is not fully known, but by its own admission, it's designed to shape opinion among the world's leaders in various fields. CNN ran a story downplaying the importance of Kerry's apartheid comment. It said, even some Israeli leaders have mentioned the word that basically means separate. It may have meant separate a long time ago, but in today's world, it indicates a method the ruthless minority uses to cling to power by means of oppression and violence. In 2008, then-candidate Barack Obama spoke about the goal of peace between Israel and the Palestinians. He said, injecting a term like apartheid into the discussion doesn't advance that goal. It's emotionally loaded, historically inaccurate, and it's not what I believe. He was actually right. Israel had taken extreme measures to remain fair with people who spend their time working to provoke them into apartheid-like behavior. David Ben-Gurion, known as modern Israel's founding father, said in 1934, we do not want to create a situation like that which exists in South Africa, where the whites are the owners and the rulers and the blacks are the workers. If we do not do all kinds of work, easy and hard, skilled and unskilled, if we become merely landlords, then this will not be our homeland. The Israeli Declaration of Independence specifically offers Arabs an invitation to full citizenship. We appeal in the very midst of the onslaught launched against us now for months to the Arab inhabitants of the State of Israel to preserve peace and participate in the upbuilding of the state on the basis of full and equal citizenship and due representation in all its provisional and permanent institutions. There are more Arabs on the Israeli Supreme Court than there are evangelical Protestants on the U.S. court, even though a third of America's citizens describe themselves as evangelical. In Israel today, non-Jews such as Arabs and Christians enjoy full citizenship. In fact, more than 1.5 million Arabs are Israeli citizens. They have representatives throughout the government. They have freedom of movement. They work in all professions at wages on par with that of Jews in the same positions. They enjoy basic human rights, including free speech. The truth is that there is nothing like the world's impression of the meaning of the word apartheid to be found in Israel. It is true that in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, these freedoms have been somewhat curtailed for two reasons. First, the Palestinians themselves largely govern those areas, and they show little interest in carefully guarding citizens' constitutional rights. Former Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad actually made it a criminal offense for Palestinians to buy Israeli goods. In April 2013, Caroline Glick, the Jerusalem Post deputy editor, reported, Fayyad personally led raids into private homes to inspect people's refrigerators to see if they had Israeli cottage cheese on their shelves. Yes, there are Israeli checkpoints and restrictions on travel between those areas and the rest of Israel, but that's because of the terrorist operations launched from those areas. The Palestinians in the so-called West Bank and Gaza elect leaders who remain committed to Israel's destruction. No matter how much Israel gives up in attempts to appease the Palestinians, they choose to remain mortal enemies to the state of Israel. No, in the Palestinian-controlled areas, they don't have the same rights, but Israel has bent over backwards to give them as many rights as possible while maintaining its own safety and the safety of its citizens. Despite billions of dollars in aid from the United States and other Western nations, the Palestinian-controlled areas are still marked by poverty and hopelessness. As I've said many times, they could have peace in a day if they would lay down their weapons and honestly seek peace with the nation of Israel. It really is a miracle nation. As the prophets predicted, the desert has bloomed. Some of the most innovative companies in the world are headquartered in Israel. They have their own version of the Silicon Valley. They're creating water management systems that, in an increasingly thirsty world, are needed more urgently every day. And in Israel, they're making those systems work. More and more, though, experts disagree on the resulting demographics of a single state. Secretary Kerry and his friends are convinced that without the creation of two separate states, the Palestinians will become the majority and rob Israel of its Jewish nature. A few years ago, it certainly looked that way, but the numbers are changing dramatically. The birth rate among Israeli women is now among the highest in the world, much higher than among the Palestinians. Also, the immigration of Jews into the land continue unabated from all over the world. On the other hand, the Palestinians are leaving in droves. The policy of the United States seems to be based on outdated demographic information. But suppose Kerry and his friends are right, and the Palestinians would soon outnumber Jews in a single state. That would mean they could exchange their rocket-propelled grenade launchers for ballots and take over the easy way. In the meantime, though, they would be welcomed into a strong democratic society with a vibrant economy, which many of them secretly crave. But too many Palestinians are unwilling to even consider it. They've been indoctrinated to hate everything about Israel. A year ago, after President Obama's visit to Israel, the ever-provocative Caroline Glick wrote, Obama came, told us he had our back, and then he told us we should force our leaders to give Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria to our sworn enemies, even as they teach their children to aspire to kill our children. And we smiled and wished him a pleasant flight home. Obama had no idea what he was getting into when he came here. In the last 44 years, the United States has devised 9 different peace plans, all of which have been based on a two-state solution. All have failed. It seems inexplicable since the people in charge, the Israelis, have shown a willingness to give away much of the nation's land and security to make it happen. But the problem is with the Palestinians. They are unreasonable. And when I say that, I don't mean a little bit unreasonable. I mean unreasonable in a way similar to the Pharaoh's hardening of heart against Israel in the Exodus. And remember what happened to Pharaoh and his mighty army. God destroyed them. On the other hand, what would happen if the Palestinians suddenly agreed to terms? They would get their own country. Following past patterns, though, they would elect radical leadership that would make the destruction of Israel their primary goal. But now they would do this as a sovereign nation, and they would be sitting next door. In fact, they would be Israel's next door neighbors on two sides, with a slim corridor of a few miles connecting Israel's north with its south. The Palestinians would control Judea, Samaria to Israel's north and east, and the Gaza Strip to the west, with an indefensible corridor connecting them. Because they have proven to be hardliners bent on destroying Israel and ridding the world of Jews, Israel would have to negotiate carefully. But the big concession has already been made. Israel has publicly committed itself to a two-state solution. Why don't Palestinians grab that with both hands? It fits both their immediate and long-term goals. But they don't see it. Like Pharaoh of old, their hearts are hardened. Sometimes God hardens hearts to his own purpose. The Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. You know, hate obscures sight of the obvious. The Palestinian leaders want so badly to butcher Israelis that they're unwilling to do what's clearly in their own best interest. They don't really want a state beside Israel. They want a state in place of Israel. That means the status quo, bad as it is, will remain until the false prophet comes on the scene. According to Daniel in Revelation, he will get Israel to sign a false peace agreement that will only last actually for 3.5 years. Here's what Isaiah predicts about this false covenant and how to get free of its curse. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord, O scoffers who rule this people and who are in Jerusalem, because you have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell we have made a pact. The overwhelming scourge will not reach us when it passes by, for we have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception. The answer is to believe in the true Messiah, who is the chief cornerstone of God's real temple. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I'm laying in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a costly cornerstone for the foundation, firmly placed. He who believes in him will not be disturbed. Your covenant with death will be canceled, and your pact with hell will not stand. When the Lord opens the eyes of the remnant of truth-seeking Israelites, they will see how they have been deceived about the Messiah for over 2,000 years. Jesus Christ identified himself as a chief cornerstone when he warned the Israelis in a parable. He applies the prediction to himself when he quotes it from Psalm 118, verses 22 and 23. The religious leaders recognized this and sought to kill him. It also means that the ancient prophets were right. God said he would regather Israel, and he's doing it. He said Jerusalem would again come under Israeli control. And in 1967, after 2,500 years of being controlled by Gentiles, the children of Israel again took the city. Don't expect that to change. However, Israel will not be secure in Jerusalem until they turn to the Messiah Jesus, as predicted in Zechariah chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. I'll be back with more after this message. In his quote-unquote apology for his apartheid comment, Secretary Kerry said, I will not allow my commitment to Israel to be questioned by anyone. I think he would probably admit that he didn't mean that literally, but it's troubling how often I hear those kinds of words. If we're to remain a democracy, Mr. Secretary, even a high government official like you has no choice but to allow disagreement and dissent. And it's obvious that your commitment to Israel is anything but ironclad. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki defended her boss by saying, some of his best friends are Jewish. That's one of bigotry's favorite lines. it doesn't actually mean a thing. What matters is what Mr. Kerry has said and done in his role as the chief diplomat of the United States. Last year, in a joint interview with the Palestinian and Israeli reporters, Kerry said the alternative to getting back to the talks is the potential of chaos. Does Israel want a third intifada? If that is his legitimate concern, then he should say it privately to the Israeli leaders, not openly, so that it appears he's trying to encourage Palestinians to make and take up arms. In the same interview, Kerry said other things that in private would be fine, but when said publicly, it becomes a threat, such as, I believe that if we do not resolve the issues between Palestinians and Israelis, if we do not find a way to find peace, there will be an increasing isolation of Israel. There will be an increasing campaign of delegitimization of Israel. We may wind up with a leadership that is committed to violence. Secretary Kerry has been around long enough that he must know that the talk about the possible violence that might come gives a tacit approval for the Palestinians to do the very thing he said. These comments, along with many others made since he took office, are unconscionable. In his private remarks to the Trilateral Commission, Kerry said something else that has received very little attention. It may, however, be even more significant than his comment on apartheid. The Obama presidency is scheduled to end in January of 2017. Kerry hinted that he has a final trick up his sleeve if nothing else works in the meantime. He said, we have enough time to do any number of things, including the potential at some point in time that we will just put something out there. Here it is, folks. This is what it looks like. Take it or leave it. At first, that threat sounds like no big deal. Kerry lays out a plan and says, here it is. But if Israel really can just take it or leave it, it'll be just like the 9 other U.S. peace plans, and they'll leave it. For this one to be different, it would have to be forced on the participants. And I'm sure that any such plan would include Israel forfeiting East Jerusalem to the Palestinians. I don't think God will let that happen. So what does Kerry have in mind here? Is he speaking for the president? Is the United States of America threatening to go to war with God? Of course, to fear going to war with God, one has to believe in God, who will do what he says he'll do. Apparently, Mr. Kerry doesn't believe God's word concerning Israel, so he's probably not too concerned about anything else God has said about it. This week, while speaking to State Department staff in Africa, Secretary Kerry indicated his position on Bible prophecy and by extension gives us a clue about his attitude toward God's chosen people. He said, some people believe that people ought to be able to only do what they say they ought to do, or to believe what they say they ought to believe, or live by their interpretation of something that was written down 1,000 plus 2,000 years ago. That's not the way I think most people want to live. You know, folks, today is a great day in the history of God's dealing with humanity. The people through whom he chose to bless the world with his word and with his son are returning to the land. Jerusalem has once again come under their control. And all of this has happened precisely as the word of the Lord foretold through the ancient prophets. At such a moment, are we Americans going to try to take from them the city God gave to them? In Isaiah chapter 37, verse 35, the Lord himself declares, I will defend this city. To hear the American Secretary of State speak of forcing a settlement and knowing what that settlement would entail makes me feel like I'm sitting in an airliner with a kamikaze in the pilot's seat. It's national suicide to fight God. Don't do it, America. God bless you, and God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.